45. So I think we should just begin. So welcome everybody who's just joined us and everybody who's been here for the previous talk. And our next speaker is Aglaia, who's going to be talking about raising high school students' awareness of implicatures with the use of Corpora.
All right, so hello everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is Aglaia, and I've been teaching English in Greece for 10 years now. I'm currently teaching English in a Greek primary school, but I have worked with learners of various levels and ages. So my presentation today concerns the research that I conducted in the course of my doctoral thesis during the years 2018 to 2021, under the supervision of Professor Elifantidou from the University of Athens, and concerned the pragmatic awareness of Greek high school students. In this presentation, I'll present ways in which the text corpora could be used in order to produce authentic material which will raise students' pragmatic awareness of implicatures. More specifically, today I'll explain what inspired my research, and I will address my research questions. Then I'll provide insight into relevance theory, the theoretical background adopted for the purposes of my study, and I will unravel the methodological steps I followed. After that, I'll present the stages of my research together with the main results, and finally, I will refer to the contribution of my study together with some suggestions for future research as well. So, what inspired this research? As a teacher myself, what I've actually noticed is that even though Greek students are taught English from a very young age, what is actually created is a generation of proficient speakers of English who are nevertheless confronted with the various misunderstandings when communicating cross-culturally due to their lack of pragmatic knowledge. So the present work aimed to provide an approach to raising their pragmatic awareness in reference to implicature retrieval by encompassing both teaching and testing materials based on real-life examples retrieved from Corpora. It aimed to investigate how familiar high school students are with the use of implicature and fill in the gap within the field of teaching pragmatics in the EFL classroom with results that may influence the teaching of implicatures in English and why not other languages as well. My main purpose was to evaluate the effect of explicit teaching of implicature with the use of authentic text retrieved from Corpora and the development of materials towards raising and assessing learners' pragmatic awareness. I aim to provide answers to the following questions. First of all, are TFL students exposed to implicatures in class and homework tasks? Secondly, what is the effect of teaching implicatures to TFL students for their developing pragmatic awareness and language proficiency? What types of materials should be developed to raise their awareness of implicatures? And finally, what types of teaching methods, either implicit or explicit, are more effective for teaching purposes of implicature? As for the theoretical background of my research, this was mainly provided by relevance theory. So it is true that the contribution of pragmatic theory in general and relevance theory in particular in the domain of EFL studies has not been explored, especially within the context of Greek public schools in which I have been working. EFL studies have largely ignored theories that explore the mental processes underlying L2 performance. Relevance theory, on the contrary, draws on a set of assumptions connected with psychological factors which interact with cognitive processes. It supports that communicators usually convey considerably more information with their utterances than what is linguistically encoded, and that both cognition and communication are relevance-oriented as defined by the cognitive and communicative principle of relevance. Moreover, relevance theory pays emphasis on the importance of the contextual effect, which is a result of the fruitful interaction between the newly stimulus and a subset of the assumptions already available in the cognitive system. Therefore, the relevance theoretic apparatus can be jointly used with culturally conditioned rules of communication and offers a theory that is not retained by social constructs that these may impose. Relevance theory shed new light on the distinction between explicit and implicit meaning and elaborated the idea that understanding an utterance is not just a matter of linguistic decoding, but of what the speaker intended to imply and what the intended context involves. And therefore, it provides the theoretical justification to examine the effect the interaction of linguistic meaning with contextual assumptions can have on utterance comprehension. Finally, it established the view of figurative speech as entirely natural, spontaneous, and pervasive in language. Relevance theory heralds a paradigm shift of science in EFL teaching due to the range and originality offered by this model. It is useful both in opening interesting lines of investigating in L2 development and in shedding light into significant practical aspects connected to L2 instruction, especially when it comes to raising pragmatic awareness. However, not adequate research has been conducted on how Corpora can assist EFL educators guide their learners to implicature retrieval, a gap that I aim to bridge through the use of Corpus Pragmatics. So Corpus Pragmatics provides me with real-life and representative samples of utterances in order to draw more valid conclusions about pragmatic challenges in L2. The global context of the sociocultural assumptions as offered by the online corpus I used was a rather facilitating tool because it allowed me to have access to real-life settings which could trigger more spontaneous responses. A corpus-based approach to teaching and testing pragmatics can assist educators to overcome one of their main difficulties, which is the development of instructional material that will provide instances of authentic interaction in English. It is true that in the beginning, pragmatics and linguistics were considered two domains of research that were regarded as mutually exclusive. However, this perception has now changed and common ground has been discovered, leading to the establishment of this field. This is defined as a science that describes language use in a real context through corpora. So in my case, the corpus I chose helped me towards having authentic materials in my both teaching and testing items. Overall, the studies using Corpora for teaching pragmatics resulted in positive outcomes to varying degrees, indicating that the corpus-based instruction can be effective when teaching various phenomena such as pragmatic routines or conventional expressions. From the available online corpora, I chose to work with COCA corpus for various reasons. First of all, COCA is a free online and easily accessible corpus of 560 million words that constitutes an ideal choice as it's an up-to-date corpus that adds 20 million words per year. It includes more than 160,000 different texts from a variety of sources and genres. It's easy to operate, and it is a well-balanced corpus in terms of register that guarantees a wide range of text types, therefore context, for the creation of my materials. The next slide aims to summarize the main stages of my research. So the first stage had to do with the evaluation of the existing textbook taught in the first grade of schools in Greece in reference to implicature. So I evaluated the amount and types of implicatures and the number of tasks focusing on implicating meaning. Then I conducted my pilot study in a Greek public high school. 20 students participated in my pilot study, and it constituted of a language test, a pre-test on implicature, 2 teaching sessions on implicature, and a post-test to check the difference between the two. Then I analyzed the data of my pilot study, the results of the pre and the post-test, and I reached conclusions regarding the materials used in the teaching process. And 1 year after the pilot study, I conducted the main study in the same school environment. This time I had 30 participants. And again, I distributed a language test to check their level of English, because in order to be able to handle the material I had developed, their level had to be at least C1. Again, a pre-test on implicature, 16 this time teaching sessions on implicature, a post-test, and an additional questionnaire which focused on whether and to what extent they had maintained contact with English throughout the lockdown period. The last stage was the evaluation of the results of the main study and the general conclusions on the material used in the teaching process. So as mentioned before, the first stage aimed to provide an overview of the English course book taught in the first grade of high school with reference to implicature retrieval, and the main conclusions were the following. First of all, most of the implicatures included were non-creative and rather stereotypical, and therefore the context in which they appeared played no significant role in their understanding. Moreover, the implicatures were predominantly found in literature and songs, whereas the texts with the fewest implicatures were newspaper articles. Only a limited number of exercises took advantage of these implicatures. Out of the total number of 97 tasks, only 8 partially took advantage of the implicature, which is about 10% of the total number of exercises offered. Overall, the material offered to the learners of the first grade of Greek high schools is not adequate to practice or raise their awareness of implicatures. Therefore, although their linguistic level they reach after the completion of the course might be rather high, yet learners are not properly prepared to deal with everyday interaction in English, where such metaphors and other figures are rather common. The next stage was the conduction of the pilot study. So for reasons of time limitation, I will not go into much detail on the pilot study. I'll simply mention its basic goals and conclusions. So with the pilot study, I aim to assess the testing and teaching procedures in order to find out if the proposed research methods and instruments were appropriate. I wanted to identify practical problems and challenges related to the research procedures, and to modify the main study design, materials, and procedures in the light of the findings of the pilot study. The conclusions of the pilot study were therefore the following. First of all, the teaching materials of the pilot study worked effectively with the participants by helping them raise their awareness of implicatures and the process of implicature retrieval. I designed the teaching materials aiming at creating authentic text, which could give learners an intriguing context in order to create their own examples as well. The successful implementation of the material verified previous researchers' assumption about the significance of inferential processing for EFL learners and the importance of explicit instruction on the teaching of pragmatics and more specifically on implicature retrieval. Finally, it was concluded that the level of difficulty of the task corresponded to their then current level of language proficiency and encouraged learners to attend to various mappings of form, meaning, function, force, and context. Moving on to the main study, it was conducted in the same school environment as the pilot study and was comprised of the following stages: the language test, the pre-test, the synthesis sessions, the post-test, and the additional questionnaire. So the rationale behind the test was the following. I want to create a 6-page test comprised of 6 tasks using data retrieved from COCA. They involve both close-ended and open-ended tasks. The variety of the task formats would cater for the various learners' learning styles and preferences. Similar was the rationale behind the teaching materials. So a balanced number of close-ended and open-ended question tags, as well as a number of production tasks was included, specifically ironies, metaphors, indirect answers, and hyperboles. Next, I will present a few examples of the teaching materials I developed. So task 1, which focused on irony, provided learners with short context and asked them to pay specific attention to the use of some words appearing in bold. In this case, this word is the word amazing. Based on the context provided, they had to choose a synonym from A to D that could best substitute this word, maintaining its meaning in a context. The next exercise, exercise 5, focused on indirect answers and asked learners to read a dialogue and judge whether the answer to a given context was relevant or irrelevant to it and justify their choice. So here the question was, will we ever stop throwing wild parties and litter the neighborhood with trash? And the indirect answer was, relax, it's just a nightmare. Moving on to metaphors. For task 9, learners were provided with 2 contexts, each of which included 1 metaphor. They were asked to read them carefully and express in their own words what the speakers actually meant. And a last example that had to do with hyperboles. For task 13, learners were given 2 short texts with an underlined phrase. I've said a million times in this case, that was meant to exaggerate. They had to pay attention to an underlined implicature and explain what the speaker meant based on the context provided. The next 2 slides present the main results of the qualitative and quantitative analysis of the pre and the post test of implicatures. So the comparison is based on mean values since the mean and the median scores of the participants' answers converge, and therefore the distribution was deemed normal. As with all inferential tests, my test involved the null hypothesis, which aimed to check its statistical significance. Regarding the statistical power of the test, all the tasks exhibited a power higher than 0.5 and lower than 1, making the test reliable enough to draw general conclusions about the materials I developed, and setting the probability of correcting, rejecting the null hypothesis. The results show, therefore, that there was an increased likelihood to accept the alternate hypothesis, which was namely that there is indeed an improvement between the scores of each task of the pretest and the scores of each of the post-test in the time that had passed between the two, including the 16 teaching sessions that took place. So as indicated here, the tasks of the main study were significantly improved in comparison to those of the pretest. The task that exhibited the greatest improvement was task 1, that had to do with implicature synonym, in which participants' average score was increased by 24.6%. Equally remarkable was participants' improvement in task 2, which concerned implicature at phrase level, and task 6, which was a true-false assumption. In task 2, their scores increased by 22.5%, and task 6 by 22.4%. Even though task 3 remained the task with the lowest scores in the post-test stage, the average scores improved by 20.6%, and the findings generally indicate that the participants' awareness of indirect answers was indeed enhanced. Based on the aforementioned results, I reached these final conclusions. First of all, that the opportunities learners are given to raise their pragmatic awareness through the educator's guidance and activities and homework tasks included in the EFL course books are extremely limited. The use of Corpora was shown to be a beneficial choice, since online Corpora offer a broad and balanced language sample. The current research also verified the general assumption reached by previous studies that one of the challenges of second language acquisition is learning the pragmatics of the target language. It also suggests that online corpora have the potential to alter the rationale and process the material development in an EFL classroom, especially for teaching pragmatics. And finally, it has been concluded that in addition to the principal use of authentic language and an interest in promoting discovery, explicit instruction is absolutely essential. So despite the limitations, I feel that this research can contribute to the domain of teaching pragmatics in an EFL environment. More specifically, the present study contributes to the theory of interlanguage pragmatics and EFL teaching, and provided additional evidence on the amount and quality of pragmatic knowledge in EFL textbooks as taught in the Greek high schools. It revealed that learners are able to understand the concept of implicature and retrieve it from a given context when exposed to explicit instruction, and proposed ways to incorporate the principles of relevance theory and the use of corpora as a useful tool towards discovery learning. It included novel tests on implicatures that aimed at exploring the participants' overall pragmatic awareness when provided with real-life context, and it hopefully paved the way for material developers and educators in order to follow a corpus-based approach to the teaching of pragmatics and incorporate authentic materials retrieved from real-life context. Overall, the present research contributes to the theory of interlanguage pragmatics. There is general consensus that the classroom lacks opportunities for pragmatic learning because classroom discourse does not provide representations of a variety of communication situations, and textbooks lack information about pragmatic features such as the use of implicatures, and contain non-authentic language samples. Nevertheless, as noted earlier, pragmatic ability is an indispensable part of non-native speakers' communicative competence, and therefore this research could be useful in terms of curriculum and pedagogy of language education. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions and comments.
Thank you very much, Aglaia. So that's very well timed, so there's plenty of time for questions and comments. Yeah, Erica?
I couldn't find the raise your hand button.
Right.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And for sure, I learned a lot from your research, and it gave me some ideas for future research I might do. So I was just wondering, the tasks that you created, the pre-test and the post-test, what were the tasks informed by in terms of second language acquisition principles, other than relevance theoretic or pragmatics principles as well?
Okay, so first of all, regarding the pragmatic and linguistic principles, I try to stick to their then current level of English. So that's why I distributed the language test, because at first I saw that the materials that I had developed based on the corpora were a little bit demanding for lower classes. That was my initial aim, to create material for various grades from junior high school up to high school. So yeah, that was a difficult task, because I had, first of all, to make sure that all my participants had this level, and secondly, I had to make a careful choice of the materials from COCA corpus in order to be both linguistically feasible for them to handle and also interesting, because some topics were too academic for their age.
Great, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Still time for more questions. Okay, I'm going to ask one. I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about the sort of coaching and feedback that the students got, because what you presented was mainly what looked a bit like test exercises, like summative assessment, like see if you can do this. And I'm wondering what you gave them to help them get better at it, which might or might not include the feedback they get once they've done it.
Okay, so first of all, the teaching materials were worked in groups by the students. So I had to divide them into groups of 5. And the first idea, the first step was for their classmates to share their answers and make them understand possible mistakes or misconceptions. And secondly, I used a lot of materials provided on their Blackboard and on YouTube, and even some short stories and films, in order to see the use of a specific metaphor in a context and be able to grasp their meaning. I didn't pay so much emphasis to the terms and technicalities. For example, to know that this is an irony and call it an irony. I just wanted them to understand that this is something more than what is actually written on paper.
Okay. And then can I just follow up and say, what exactly is the role of the corpus? Because could you have done that without using a corpus?
Right.
Could you just
Well,
grab some
yes,
examples from somewhere?
Right. The idea of the corpus emerged because when I had a look at their course books, I saw that most of the materials were developed in order to lead them to a specific result. So some of the exercises were grammar oriented, vocabulary oriented. So I wanted something authentic in order to be able to see a real context and grasp their meaning based on this, even though they might have some unknown words or some unknown concepts as well. But I wanted them to see how a real life setting is.
Yeah, no, that seems like a really good idea to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still got time for more if anybody wants to ask something. Okay, well, I'm just pausing because sometimes you think that nobody's got anything and somebody suddenly does. But if not, I guess we can just say thank you very much. It was really interesting, both really interesting presentations. So thank you. And Ryoko, I should stop recording now, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
I've lost the, it's up at the top, yeah.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing.